President-elect Joe Biden campaigned on ambitious energy goals, but of course now the question is, what will his administration be able to implement? So for more on that, we want to bring in Abigail Ross Hopper. She's president and CEO of the Solar Energy Industries Association. Abigail, great to have you on the program. Solar ETFs, clean energy stocks, they've really been outperforming since we got the results of the election. I think the big question now is, what should be on the top of the Biden administration's agenda here when it comes to clean energy? How do you see that?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I think it's clear what needs to be at the top of the agenda is how do we make this all happen even more quickly, right? There's consumer demand for solar and clean energy. There's the infrastructure to make it happen. And so we just need to make it happen more quickly. And so we can do that with tax policy, with smart trade policy, with transmission, with infrastructure. But there's a lot of things the Biden administration can do to just make it happen quicker.
Like removing tariffs. But wouldn't that give an advantage, say, to the Chinese companies, which, the first time we tried this, Solyndra, they undercut. And Solyndra is not the poster child for great companies, but the Chinese manufacturers got subsidized by the Chinese government and undercut the U.S. solar energy. So what good is removing the tariffs?
Removing the the tariffs really are not helping domestic manufacturers. If you look at what's happened in the past 3 years, we have seen a pretty significant drop in jobs in solar as opposed to a small bump in increased manufacturing jobs. And so if we think about, what's the goal here? Like, what are we really trying to accomplish? The tariffs are not accomplishing that. So we put forth a whole suite of policies that we think the Biden administration could enact that would help incent domestic manufacturing. Tariffs are just not the right way to do it. We do have tariffs in place that prevent the anti-dumping, which is what you're referring to around China. The ones that we're really interested in are the ones that apply to solar modules and solar cells from anywhere in the world. Those were put on by the Trump administration about 3 years ago and have really, despite our growth, have really had a pretty significant impact on our industry.
Well, and Abigail, talking about that impact, I guess the question is, to what extent have the trade tariffs then limited the growth? I know you're saying that you were still able to grow during this time, but where would we be if they weren't in effect?
Yeah, it's an interesting argument to make, right? How do you prove the absence of growth? We look at what we had projected even before the tariff case had been filed, and we were continuing on an upward trajectory. Over 2017 and 2018, instead, we were flat. And so we can see really clearly that growth we had anticipated didn't happen. We now have been growing at a steady rate, but again, not as much as we had anticipated we would be growing without those tariffs. That being said, we grew 43% year over year in 2019, in the middle of a pandemic. So the demand for solar is strong. And I think this administration will be well poised to figure out the best ways to help our growth and help us grow more quickly so we can get more Americans back to work. We can help solve the climate crisis. And I think clean energy has a really important role to play in solving the environmental justice crisis as well.
What about some kind of standard policy nationwide? And I bring that up because I have relatives through my other half. They have a big house in New Jersey. They got the solar stuff on the roof. They're literally paying $6 a month for electricity in the summer. And yet, though, the hurdles they went through are a nightmare because they don't have the battery to store the excess they give. I don't think they sell back, but you get where I'm going with this. Why not make this standard instead of 50 different policies?
You have my vote. You have my vote for that. What you raised is really sort of one of the hallmarks of American energy policy, and one of the challenges, right, is that we have federal energy policy, and then we have 50 states with their own set of rules and their own ideas about how it should work. You specifically talked about residential solar, and one of the things we think that we can standardize, and the federal government can be helpful with, is getting rid of some of those what we call soft costs, right? The cost of permitting and delays and 100 different rules for various different jurisdictions. And so we've been working with the National Renewable Energy Lab to standardize some of that. and make that more consistent across all the states, so those costs come out and it's easier for consumers to adopt solar. We also think that there's lots of ways in which sort of tax policy can be standardized, right? And transmission policy can be standardized. Land use could be standardized, best practices for where we site solar and how we do that. So I think there's lots of ways we can make it less challenging, a little bit more cookie cutter, so that there'll be lots ways that we can facilitate the adoption of solar.
Abigail Ross Hopper, President and CEO of the Solar Energy Industries Association. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me.